Welcome along to the Carbon Clarity Podcast, the podcast for the carbon curious. My name's Kev Cooling, founder and managing director of Hut22 Limited, your facilitation and carbon specialist. And today I'm extremely pleased to be joined by Andrew Chamberlain, managing director of Elevated. Andrew's a specialist in non-profit business management. Hi, Andrew. How you doing?
I'm very good, sir. I'm very good. It's lovely to be on somebody else's podcast for a change. Yeah, excellent. Thank you for
That's
inviting
it.
me.
No problem at all. Thanks for coming on. So, and your podcast is?
My podcast is Association Transformation. You can find it wherever you find your podcasts.
Absolutely, all your usual outlets. And I
Exactly.
think you're on like episode, what, 100 and something?
Yesterday we recorded episode 112 yesterday.
That's fantastic. And it comes
Yeah,
out weekly, does it?
it does, yeah.
I mean,
So
that's quite intense. That's quite an intense program.
it is, and I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted doing
My
it.
creative juices are running dry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh.
Well, we figured today we might have a chat about something that's maybe a little bit outside of most people in businesses kind of vision a little bit, I suppose, which is looking at things from the point of view of trade associations and membership associations. So loads of people, probably most businesses and most individuals, belong to one or more associations of some description, whether it's a professional institution or, like I said, trade association. But thinking about it from the other side of the fence, think about it from the association side of the fence, we thought we might just want to have a chat about what you see as the current kind of challenges for associations in the kind of general vicinity of sustainability and carbon. So what do you
Yeah.
reckon? What are the big challenges right now?
Oh my goodness. Well, I don't know if you've heard of this issue called climate change. But
Oh,
that's yeah. Tell me
let me
more.
let me get my notebook.
Yeah. Yeah. It's. I mean, this is a recording probably of a conversation that I'm having well, I'm pushing the conversation constantly
Mm,
because, the membership sector, the association world, trade associations, membership bodies, learning societies, these large professional networks, professional communities are all are all aware of. Yeah, I think it's fair for me to say, it is fair for me to say, are all aware of the climate crises. And I
mm,
think arguably they're all aware of the opportunity that they have as these sort of focal points for professional communities to sort of lead debate and discussion and to sort of generate solutions to the crises. But I think, at the time of recording, I think I think it's fair to say that the trade association world isn't realizing yet its potential in terms of what it can do to support individuals and individual businesses, and whole industries and sectors. And I think there's so much that we can be doing, and I just don't think quite we're there yet.
mm.
Um, yeah, which is
There's,
frustrating, but also exciting because I think the opportunities are huge.
yeah, it does feel like there's a huge opportunity, doesn't it? And I wonder whether they're not kind of seeing that opportunity, but also I wonder if they've got a bit of an obligation, perhaps, to their members in the same way that they provide advice for other cross-cutting themes, that everybody is facing, whether that's kind of, I don't know, tax or health and safety or employment law or whatever. Um, Climate change is it's a far-reaching thing, isn't it? And just it affects just about everybody. So it feels like maybe that's something that they definitely need to address, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about sort of membership organizations. I talk about their civic responsibility. I think, as we're sort of we reach the quarter mark of the 21st century, and you look at what bodies are out there providing that type of support, as I say, to individuals, to businesses, but to industries more broadly. I think this sort of civic responsibility that these types of organizations have. I don't think there's anybody else. I don't think there's any other type of organization right now that has the reach, arguably has the influence, and has the potential to sort of, like as you say, sort of, this is an issue that affects everybody, and there's no question about that. And every one of us, either as individuals or as corporate entities, has an obligation to respond to this crisis. And I think we should be looking to our membership organizations as our representative bodies to provide us with that guidance. And as you said, if I've got an issue with, I don't know, calculating my VAT or understanding how to process my submissions on around health and safety or something like that, then I'll go to to my trade
Yeah.
association. I'll look at the guidance they've produced, listen to I mean, maybe they've produced a podcast or they've generated a video content or they've published some written guidance. I'll go to them for that. But right now, if I'm thinking about, well, how am I, where do I start? What's my starting point for understanding, first of all, what's my starting position, understanding my carbon benchmark for me to even, my carbon
Yeah.
baseline rather. I right now I wouldn't automatically be thinking, oh, my membership organization is the go-to for that. Now,
Yeah.
and I'm generalizing, and I think, dear listener, I'm generalizing. This isn't. I'm not talking about everybody. Before, you get yeah, a ton of DMs saying, "Oh my God!" But my trade association does. Some do, but most are not yet in that position.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's some fairly I mean, I don't want to say obscure, but there's fairly kind of niche trade associations, aren't there? And they're probably
Yeah.
very focused on giving their members support in that specific area because it's quite niche, it's quite specialized, so they need that, I suppose. So at its most basic level, this is probably just about signposting, for instance, isn't it? Associations gathering together sources of information and providing that to their members just to help them kind of kickstart that journey. But I mean, are there any good examples? I don't know, of associations that are doing a bit more than just signposting. There's CAFA, isn't there? Is it CAFA? Am I thinking of the right
Yeah,
thing?
CAFA, yeah, Climate Action for Associations. So they are, I mean, they're an excellent organization. They're a fabulous organization. And I really,
Yeah.
I encourage all my clients, to join CAFA
Mm.
because they are a collective of membership organizations, trade associations, as well as, some of the institutes, some of the Royal Colleges. They are a really could, hmm, they will be a hugely
Pauses for
influential.
thought.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. They will be a hugely influential collective. They will. And that's why I'm encouraging, as I say, all my clients to join, because I think we need, as a sector, and by that I mean the membership world, the trade association world, as
Yeah.
a sector, we need a collective voice to advocate on our behalf. And CAFA, I mean, they're still a young organization. They're only few, maybe no, maybe 3 or 4 years old. So,
Right.
and but they are building up a head of steam, and I am seeing them everywhere now, which is fantastic. They're on lots
Mm.
of different platforms talking about what what associations can do for members. So, yeah, they exist, and I'll do anything I can to support them.
Hmm. Yeah, I was just thinking then, just reflecting whilst you were talking about it, and we talk about this idea of obligation. There's I suppose businesses who belong to associations, they have got some actual kind of regulation as well that they need to comply with. And of course, that's exactly the sort of thing you go to a trade body for, isn't it? You exactly go to them and say, crikey, I know I've got to do this thing, whatever it is. Can you, is what advice have you got for me? So there are regulations out there about reporting ESOS and SECR and all those other acronyms that, we could get into. But
Well,
yeah,
it's
that seems
funny
like
you
it's a bit of a
mentioned.
gap if they.
Yeah, and I think it is a gap, and it's a missed opportunity. It's funny you mentioned ESOS is the most recent example of that I can quote. I'm currently working with to create a new trade association.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
for facilities managers, so the Facilities Management Association. I mean, the clue is in the title. And one of the kind of drivers for creating this body is that you know one of the people, like one of the potential members I was talking to said, yeah, well, we missed that deadline because we didn't know it was coming up. Now,
Blindsided by it. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
I know obviously that's not any trade association's fault. I mean, every
Right. You've got
business has you're responsible for meeting your own legal
exactly,
obligations.
exactly. Of course you are. Yeah.
but they said, but we get other bodies that we're members of. We do get notice or when there is regulation on the horizon, and there are reporting commitments, and we didn't get this from anywhere, and we need that, and so that's and that really triggered my thinking around. Well, actually,
Mm,
yeah, why are we not plugging this gap? Because it's so obvious. I mean, I'm doing some work with a couple of other clients who've mentioned to me, the CSR directive. Now, obviously, that's an EU directive, but it's still, depending what the nature of your work is and where you're working, it's still applicable. And these are clients in the US who are asking me about it. And, again, it's like, well, great, yeah, I can tell you about it and I can point you in loads of different directions, but I don't have a single repository of information and guidance that you could be going to. I'm not sending you regular notifications because I don't know myself all of it because I'm not the trade body. And I
yeah,
think, it's just another example where, yeah, I think the way you describe it there, being sort of blindsided by a lot of this. Because we know the landscape is really busy. The landscape is arguably really cluttered. And
I
things
was
like
going to
this
say that.
are, yeah, they are creeping up on us, and it's like, whoa, hang on a minute, I got to do that as well.
It, yeah, and you know what? I think you're right. It's a really busy, rapidly changing and evolving landscape, and that's absolutely that's for sure. Just as you get used to one thing, something else comes
Yeah,
along.
yeah,
And it's kind of been made a bit harder, I think, by Brexit, particularly for those businesses that still trade in Europe, particularly if they trade something physical.
yeah,
There's new regulations in Europe about the movement of carbon across different borders, and if you're trading the Europe, you have to understand that and think about that, and that suddenly gets very complicated very quickly. So having somewhere that you can go to give you get advice on it is great. So even if that is just signposting, I suppose. So how do associations kind of manage that for other issues? Do they just kind of provide information? Do they do any primary research? Do they write guidance? Do they
yeah,
hold
yeah.
seminars or whatever?
All of the above,
Mm,
all of the above. I mean, and I think the carbon piece is distinct in so much as I can imagine a scenario when these trade. I mean, a lot of these trade associations are decades. Some of them are 100+ years old. Some of them are 1,000 years old. If you're looking at the guilds, that are based in the
oh
city of
yeah,
London,
yeah, yeah,
these
yeah.
guys are literally 1,000 years old. And I can imagine, previously, and when new issues or regulations or legislation, these thematic issues have arisen.
Hmm.
The obvious one just kind of spring into mind. I'm thinking health and safety.
Yeah.
When health and safety materialized, explicitly materialized as an issue that we needed to understand. I get, and we're talking decades and decades and decades ago. I get a
Mm.
sense that perhaps this is the same struggle, same issue that associations were dealing with then as they are now. This is a new issue. We're not really certain what our role is here and how we're supposed to help our members navigate it. And over time, they obviously have, and things like, HR legislation, yes, health and safety regulation, taxation issues. They have understood where they fit within the debate and the discussion and the process around these issues. I believe they absolutely will understand where they fit within the carbon and the climate process, if you like, the carbon management process. Of course, the difference with carbon and climate is the urgency around this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I was going to
and
say
that,
that.
yeah, and that's where this differs to every other issue, to every other challenge and opportunity that organizations have dealt with and that associations have provided support for. They've not had this sense of urgency. Um,
It sounds like they might not actually have a sense of urgency anyway, by the sound of it.
well, some of them, yes, indeed. Some of them, yes.
But you know what? I think probably it's more about they're just not equipped to understand. as you say, they're part in the conversation. What is it they do? But I often say to clients, actually, it's I'm glad you brought up health and safety. There's so many parallels between it. It's a thing that everybody knows is everybody's responsibility, right? You know,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
don't walk past something in your place of work that's obviously dangerous and just ignore it. Well, I hope you wouldn't. But
Oh,
so
and say what I tell you what, IOSH can deal with it. I'll go and speak to IOSH and they
right,
can tell me what to do about it. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, exactly. But the truth is that putting into place all the processes and procedures and the policies and the management practices and the governance and things that you need around health and safety, there's loads of parallels between that and the way you might tackle, carbon management or get into net zero or whatever it is. And for those kind of more general advice about how you do that stuff, that is the sort of thing that people go to their trade association for, wouldn't they? For health and safety, I mean. So,
Yeah.
but you're right. There's definitely parallels there with health and safety, and I've said that sort of regularly, really. I just wanted to come back to that point you mentioned right near the start about civic responsibility, and
Yeah.
more broadly, sort of beyond the carbon. Obviously, if we think about sustainability more broadly, it's a much broader church than just carbon.
Yeah.
What other sorts of things do you think associations might be doing, or are they covering all the other bases well already? I mean, I know that's a mass. I just like to. This is not the place for a specific conversation, Andrew. Let's just have some broad, sweeping generalizations. So,
Well, it's interesting. There are always beacons of excellence in the industry, and there are many associations who recognize their social responsibility and and are able to position their value proposition within the context of a or within the broader context. I mean, a
mm,
really fantastic. And if I look at some like the British Dietetics Association,
yeah,
they have really, they're all about nutrition, health and well-being, and they are holistic in how they understand the impact of nutrition on self, but also on communicating how health and well-being isn't limited to the individual. It is a community issue. It is a
right,
social responsibility,
yeah,
and are able to articulate the residual impacts of health and well-being on other sort of broader issues in society, be it health and well-being linked to equality and diversity,
yeah,
being linked to access to education, being linked to poverty, being linked to basically, or they've looked at the UN Sustainable Development Goals and they've said, well, what is it that we do that we're able to say this is how it's supporting that particular goal. And I think that for me is an excellent example of an association saying, well, look, we're obviously not gonna, we can't do everything for everybody, and that would just be silly because we'll end up pleasing nobody. But what we
mm,
are doing, what we are doing is this, and this, and it's helping with this, that, and the other. And I think that's a good way of reframing an awful lot of what you're doing as well, because they haven't necessarily done anything different. They're not putting anything out the door that they weren't already delivering, but
oh,
it's
that's
how they're
interesting.
framing it and it's how they're talking about it that is advancing their members' knowledge and understanding of what they as individuals are doing to contribute to the SDGs. But
Uh,
conversely, oh sorry, but
no, no,
conversely,
carry on,
I've
carry
I've
on.
I worked with another membership a chartered membership organization, and I'm not going to name them because they should be ashamed.
Okay,
When I was talking, talking to members of their education department, and they had never heard of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and this is a chartered
yeah,
institution working heavily involved in the construction industry, and
ooh,
they hadn't, and this is the head of education had not heard of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and that for
okay.
me is like a massive red flag. I was like, oh my God, then what are you talking about, and how are you, So yeah,
That's a really, I think it's a really interesting point you made then about the Dietetic Association, in that they aren't trying to solve the whole problem for their
no,
members. What they're doing is they're thinking about how is what we do relevant to this issue and how does it impact this issue and how do we frame it for this issue? And UN SDGs is a good framework for that, isn't it? It kind of does make you think about the interrelationship of poverty and employment or what whatever. That's
It
probably a bit too
does.
obvious actually, but you know what I mean. It
No,
kind of it
yeah,
helps,
yeah.
helps you think about the joint issues of mobility and owning a car. But it's not really that, but you know what I mean. But uh so yeah, it's that's really interesting, and maybe that's what associations should do. The first thing they should do perhaps is just reflect on how is it what they do, the specialism that they're thinking about impacts on the climate, and that's
and
something
then
they
it
could definitely do, isn't it?
and then it makes it easier then for the member to do the same.
Yes.
Because I think again, it's easy to feel, as you say, it's such a busy landscape. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by everything that's been thrown at us. And, you know, as you know, I'm not a specialist in carbon management. I'm not a specialist in environmental sustainability, but I get a ton of stuff coming across my desk on a daily basis. And a lot of it, it just becomes white noise. It's just like, oh my God, and it's relating to all sorts of different aspects of, yeah, you're
Mm,
right, not just carbon management, but just across the piece, across the sustainability, social
mm,
responsibility piece.
mm.
So it's so easy to become overwhelmed. And I think a lot of associations are overwhelmed by it and haven't been able to position themselves within a broader context. And let's be fair, in the UK in recent years, this has become such a highly politicized environment that a lot of trade associations, a lot of membership bodies are afraid to get into it.
That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it has you're absolutely right. I mean, it's definitely it can definitely divide people, can it? People on one side of the argument and the other. But I think the weight
I mean,
the thing I always come back to is you can't some people will disagree with this, but you can't kind of argue with the science, right? I mean, the thing about science is we have to accept that we need to be able to change our minds because that's the point of science, right? If you find
yeah,
something new and you change your mind, and you have to be open to that. But our absolute best understanding and with a very significant degree of certainty is, what we understand about climate change and the way that, our actions are driving that. So even though it has become politicized and some people don't agree with it, it's interesting to me that some associations still feel that it's too much of a hot potato to touch or something,
yeah,
maybe if that's what you're suggesting. And that kind of feels like
yeah.
a bit of a cop out, if I'm honest.
And it is a cop out. It is, and let's make no bones about it. Some associations are entrenched in the 1950s, and that's and
They
I
still have
make no
hat stands in the corner of the office, right? So they can just pop their trilby on there.
absolutely the tea
Not that I've
lady
got anything
coming
against
round.
trilbies, but I want to be absolutely clear. I've got nothing against trilbies. Any hat fans out there, please don't write in.
The Association of Hat Makers. We
The
don't mean
milliners,
you.
milliners,
That's
yeah.
right. But yeah, some of them are, and some of them simply refuse to acknowledge that they have a role to play. They simply, and I don't think that's necessarily political. I think that's arguably some of that is just inertia. There are some within the industry. There's those of us who work broadly in the sector. We kind of half joke about the term, that's not how we do it here. They're the worst,
Mm,
whatever they are, 6, 7 words, whatever it is, in the sector, and it becomes a real barrier on many, many different issues. This is not just a there are segments of the sector, elements of the sector where they are so entrenched in this is how we do it. They are not going near not just issues like around carbon, but artificial intelligence. They're not even looking at it. They weren't touching it because they argue us that's not our responsibility. And that then I think points to a much the broader cultural debate that needs to be had. And I would argue won by the discussion around membership organizations' civic responsibility.
yeah. I mean, it's about good value for your members, isn't there? If you're
Yeah.
not tackling those big issues that your members are struggling with, then and it's true that they don't have to solve the whole thing, right? They just need to
No,
help their
never.
members, give them the maybe I don't know the tools to be able to think about whatever the issue is, or just to get started on the road.
Absolutely. I don't think a membership organization has to solve any problem. I think it has to be there as a source of support and as the foundation for learning and education and personal professional development for
Yeah.
support and it's a conduit between the member and other sources of information and guidance and support, invariably
So
which
how?
comes from specialists like us, who
Yeah. Yeah.
specialist consultants who are out there.
Yeah. So how are it's really interesting that it's kind of ingrained in that culture and its inertia and it's kind of, the way that they've operated for however long they've operated. So how are associations typically structured? They have a board or they have a chief exec or whatever. How are they typically structured? Because I guess you've got to change that from that highest level, whatever that highest level looks like.
So the highest level always is the board of directors. And the board of directors will always be a group of volunteers who are selected from amongst the membership. And
Oh,
beneath that,
oh, really? Okay. So,
yeah,
so the members are on a part of the board, so they must understand the issues that they are wrestling with.
yeah, and this is always one of the idiosyncrasies of the membership sector is that as business owners or as professionals within their sector, you're absolutely right. They are dealing with these issues on a day-to-day basis,
Hmm.
but then they step into the board environment and they become instinctively risk averse.
Okay.
And that's not a criticism. It's an observation. They become instinctively risk averse. I've seen boards become paralyzed with indecision because they are, quite frankly, either ill-experienced or unqualified to be in that governing space. And that
Hmm.
is that I'm not, and I never ever advocate. And as you know, I spend a lot of time in boardrooms. I do a lot of
Yeah.
governance support for individuals and teams. They are unqualified, and that is then exacerbated by a lack of training and support and development for them in these volunteer roles. And that lets them down. That really lets them down. And it's not
Hmm.
fair on those individuals because I know that everybody puts themselves forward, volunteers because they want to have a positive impact on
Of
their
course. Yeah. Yeah.
association and they want their association to have a positive impact on members. But they lack they often lack the skills and expertise to govern, which is totally understandable and no criticism of
Where would
them.
they have got
Where
those
you're going
from?
to
They
get it
could,
from? Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. If you're not doing it, you're not doing it.
And
So
it's and
they
it's
need
different. It's different, right, to running a business. It's a
completely
different skill
different.
set. Yeah.
Completely different because beneath the board of directors, you will have a qualified, experienced staff of membership professionals who know how to run the organization, know how to deliver your events portfolio, put together your membership portfolio, process financial transactions, do the marketing and communications, all the things that every office environment for any business, whether it's profit or non-profit, has to do. But because they are often untrained, they invariably get sucked into the operational minutiae of the organization, and
Because
it
that's their natural
becomes
environment, right? That's kind of where
yeah.
they've come from, and they feel comfortable there, presumably.
Exactly. And who doesn't?
Yeah.
We all understand it. We all understand what it means if my business is breaking the law or I'm breaking the law, I get it. I understand. If I haven't got any money in the bank, I get it. Sadly, all too often, I understand. We understand the implications when operational things don't go as planned, but we're not, understanding the implications when strategy doesn't play out. Well, that's a different kettle of fish. And if you're not, as you say, if you're not experienced or trained in it,
Yep.
then you've got no hope. And I think that's a big issue that's letting the sector down around the carbon management question at the moment, which is a lot of boards are ingrained in the detail of running the organization, much to the chief executive's chagrin, and therefore they're not given the headspace to think strategically about, well, what are the big issues that our members are facing, and what can we do as an organization to support them. They're not given that freedom because
Yeah.
they're not given some proper support.
It's really interesting, that relationship between the board and the CEO. You know, that whole relationship between the board who are kind of dealing with strategy and the CEO and the team who are dealing with operations, and how all that works is fascinating.
Well, and I think also it exemplifies exactly the link between carbon management, carbon literacy, the climate crisis. It demonstrates explicitly that link between those issues and governance.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
and
It
it's yeah, go on, sorry.
It's well, I was just going to say it's so often the element that people forget when they, at least when they start on their journey around carbon management. But very often people go straight to technical fixes, and you need those technical fixes. Of course you do. You need to have the most efficient equipment and the most efficient vehicle fleet, the most efficient whatever it is. But at the same time, because we know that upwards of 80% of an organization's emissions are in their value chain, their supply chain, and what happens to their products downstream, you can't deal with all of that with technical fixes. So you kind of start
No,
to have to think about governance, about procurement, about the way that you do business travel,
yeah,
all those other things. And it's so often the thing that people forget or put in the box that just says that's a bit too difficult to deal with. I know
yeah,
there's something
yeah.
over there. I'm just going to put it over there because I've got far too much on my plate over here.
And
Yeah,
that's where the risk aversion really begins to shine,
yeah,
because often, yeah, that's really hard. And why is it hard? Well, perhaps it's complicated. There's lots of different personalities and people and politics involved. There's cost implications. There's risk attached to it. And that's when they become, oh, well, we leave that for someone else to worry about. And that's when you really see the risk aversion come through.
yeah. And I'm talking about, I don't really work with associations, so I'm talking about just general business. But it feels like understanding all of those different elements, all those different threads, and helping businesses understand those is exactly where trade associations can offer
Yeah,
value to their members, doesn't it? And that whole
yeah,
thing that we were talking about just before we started recording around the one-to-many relationships that trade associations have got, they can touch so many organizations. I'm feeling like we're just scratching the surface, but I know you've kind of got to finish up. You've got a hard stop to go on to something else. So let's leave it there. Maybe let's think about another session where we can get into a bit more detail, perhaps. But thank you so much for coming along, everybody. This is only episode 2 of Carbon Clarity, podcast for the carbon curious. I ought to record that in a little jingle, get some music behind it or something. But
I love it.
but you can find Carbon Clarity anywhere you find your normal podcasts. You can also find Association Transformation, Andrew's podcast, on which he's a co-host. Episode 112 coming soon. I don't know when it's coming, but when is it coming?
Today, you actually went out this
Today.
morning.
Oh, there you go. Brilliant. There you go. You can go and find it right now. Andrew, thanks so much for coming
No,
on.
thank you.
As
Thank
always,
you.
great to talk to you. Let's have another conversation at some point soon.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Kevin. I appreciate it.